This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome again to another exciting episode that we are covering as a part of the Ultimate Global Podcast, a special series of episodes on personal growth and networking. And the topic is courage on sharing your voice. I don't know how many times do we come across this particular theme in our lives, no matter what job profession we are in. But the courage that you show in sharing your voice in your personal life, professional life, matters a lot. And we've got a very special guest for this evening in Sydney, joining us from Sydney. I've met him a couple of times, always inspired by his story. Met him through Nick Bendel, whom we have already invited before for a podcast. So he defines himself as a courage champion. He's also a keynote speaker, and he's also a two-time LinkedIn top LGBTQIA plus voice. And he is also the CEO of the World Gay Boxing Championships Limited, which he does. But Martin, this is in our words. We would always want to ask you to describe yourself in your own words so that our audience can understand more about your story.
So first of all, I'm Martin Stark. My pronouns are he, him, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I currently am, the Gamma people, and pay respects to others past, present, and emerging. So I'm the courage champion, and I just define courage as taking ownership of fear, venturing forward with confidence and resilience. And literally, it's the word I have tattooed on my back. My professional background is 15 years of tech procurement, negotiating products and services, hardware, software, outsourcing services. And for the last 4.5 years, I've been speaking about courage on LinkedIn, at events, and I delivered the world's first boxing competition for the LGBTQ plus community during World Pride last February. And next year, I'm going to do the same thing all over again in Chicago.
That's awesome. And is it something that you started in 2019?
Yeah, so I came up with an idea in 2019 of why I organised the world's first boxing competition for the LGBTQ plus community. And I shared that on LinkedIn, and I kept sharing that on LinkedIn, and I kept sharing that. And then I found myself being interviewed on podcasts, getting media interviews, set up a not-for-profit, kept being interviewed, managed to be interviewed by CNN, The Guardian, BBC Sport. My claim to fame is for a few hours on the BBC Sports webpage, there were three main stories. There was Muhammad Ali, there was Martin Stark, and there was Anthony Joshua. So there was the best boxer of all time, the person who was one of the world heavyweight boxing championships at the current time, and Martin Stark. So when you talk about proximity to people, for a few hours, I was with the greatest and one of the great boxers of the world. And I kept sharing my journey on LinkedIn, which is what I now help people with their LinkedIn journey.
Very good.
Yep. It's always a vulnerable kind of topic to discuss, courage. People don't have the courage sometimes to talk about their personal life or what's going on with any kind of aspect in their work life that they want to talk about. Before we kind of talk about how people can work on that, do you have any experience personally from you, Martin, that you would want to share with us as to how courage has played a role in your life?
I would say for a majority of my career, I had what was called part-time confidence. Unless I reached my own standard, I was never completely confident. When I could do something, I was uber confident. What I probably didn't realize, that standard was always a very high standard. I was getting high achiever every single year in performance reviews, delivering against objectives. But it was almost that imposter syndrome. And I remember a performance review, again, it was good feedback, but one thing said, I want Martin to be more courageous. So that's what I decided to do. But for the last 17, 18 years, if anybody knows my story, you read a I've been in comas, I've been in hospital multiple times. I've had to be courageous to get through what I've got through. Having a tracheotomy is the hardest thing I've ever done, I've ever been through, and I had to be courageous to get through that. So it's not really a choice in many aspects.
Before I kind of enter into more questions, I want to involve George here as well. George, we have discussed about courage, fear and courage in business with one of the previous guests from BNI, Rebecca Rad. This is another topic we are doing on courage today. How do you see courage in general for people like Martin and others, or even in your life? And do you have any questions as well for Martin you want to ask?
I think confidence is a learnt thing, comes from experience. Courage is there until the confidence arrives.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the courage, there's a very good chance you won't ever get the confidence. Martin, for your benefit, I have Sarab and I were chatting about, I have a book which I'm writing, which is called Funny Sayings, Serious Business. And I have a whole lot of sayings, but they all mean something. And one of my sayings, which is one of my cornerstone sayings, is if you have the courage to fail, you automatically gain the right to succeed. So if you don't have the courage to fail, you'll never try. And if you never try, you can't possibly succeed. So to me, courage is about being there until the confidence kicks in. Confidence can take a while to get there. Confidence comes from having done it a few times. Courage and being courageous, you need that the first time round. A tracheotomy, you're not going to be confident about that.
No.
So you have to be courageous if you're going to get through. So I'm very interested to hear a lot more from you.
So if we look at courage, I'm going to take this to a company. So companies want people to be courageous. Moral courage, taking a firm stand for what you believe in. A company's vision, mission, their values. It's all about moral courage. When we think about steadfast courage, that's being resolute, focused, and purposeful. You think about your annual objectives. Companies, they want you to achieve your objectives. They want to serve customers. They want to grow business, achieve sales. That's all about being steadfast. Think about cerebral courage, that disruptive thinking, being innovative. Any company that doesn't innovate in today's world, well, we know what will happen. They won't be as successful. They'll become complacent, and then they'll be spending so many time and resources trying to play catch up. So that's just 3 examples of where companies want their employees and staff to be courageous. Now, where does fear manifest? That's in the culture. That's in if somebody says something, what's going to happen. Whereas if fear wasn't there, we see better collaboration, more innovation, more trust versus lack of trust, mismanagement. So really when fear is in the organization, it's in the culture, you don't get those results, and people don't want to be there, or people scared. Would you rather be in a company where you can be you, or would you rather be in a company where you're scared all the time? And the difference. And that's really where courage to share your voice. It's not just speaking up, this happened to me today. It's actually sharing your opinion. It could be, what company wants to do X. This is how I believe we should do this. Or there was an example in another company where it didn't work. These were the learnings. They want you to have an opinion. That's why you paid your salary. When you get your bonus, you've achieved your objectives. And that's really the crux of having the courage to share your voice.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that managers work with confidence, leaders work with courage.
Yeah,
because the leader is the one that it gives the person the courage to go out and stretch and go for it.
Yeah.
The manager, they don't want you to be too courageous sometimes. They just want you to follow the system, do this. tick the box, move on. And they're a compliance person, whereas your leaders in this world, they're the people that generate the courage.
If we look at this from people development, managers might be in a role for 2 years and then they're going to think about, where do I go next in developing their teams? So courage should be a responsibility of everybody. It should be the responsibility of a manager to take care of their team. They want their team to be courageous. It doesn't always work out that way, but in my essence, it's a hallmark of being a good manager, is actually inspiring courage in your team.
Yeah, I slice the cake a little bit thinner. When you become a really good manager, you've actually become a leader, not a manager.
Yeah.
In my interpretation.
I'm with you there. With you there.
So I think that can be a good topic to discuss further. Are there any traits that we find of courageous leaders? And what does it really take you to become a leader from a manager, or for you to transform from a manager to a leader? Are there any specific traits that people can work on, or does it come naturally to some people and it does not come naturally to others? How would you define it, Martin?
Really, I believe there are probably 5 things of making courage a habit. And these are the traits that the leader will have. And these are the traits that a leader can inspire in their team to have. So it's a continuous loop of courage. You pass the baton along. And the first thing is to actually start from a place of courage rather than a place of fear. If you start, it might not work out, you can be scared. If you start from a place of courage, and people see that when they model that behavior, those are the things that people are inspired by and aspire to. The second is actually leaning into fear. Why are you scared? Because fear is a great source of information. Is it going into a meeting knowing that if you're not prepared, you're going to be shown up, versus being prepared for that difficult meeting or that hard conversation, but understanding why and taking those steps to be prepared. And the third step is really committing to your values. This is about doing the right thing, not what is easy. We've seen multiple cases where there's been wrongdoing and the company's reputation and brand have been damaged. And then we learn later, well, things were happening, somebody spoke up and they weren't listened to. But imagine if just doing the right thing, committing to your values. Really, and the fourth is making courage the norm, and that's accepting where people are at. People have their own journeys to courage and confidence, allowing people to make mistakes, learning from those mistakes and reinforcing with positive language. Well done. You worked really hard there. This is what you might want to consider for the next time. And finally, it's actually just getting on with it. Less thinking, or enough thinking and enough doing. Otherwise, if you're always thinking and talking, what actually gets done? So really, those are the 5 traits, and a good leader will inspire that in others, and a future leader will start using those and displaying those traits.
And I think, George, it's also important not only for a leader to be courageous, but also, as Martin pointed out before that, for the team members itself to be courageous enough to their team members, to their team leaders. But I think the environment is created by the people around them. If they're working in an organization which flourishes with this environment, that you're open enough to say anything, unless you're mindful of your actions, mindful of your words, and we will allow you to speak your mind up. But I think it's important for the team members as well to kind of speak up openly about if there's any issues. What's your take on that, George?
I've run a number of teams over the years, and there's one part of employing people I have never changed, irrespective of what business it was in. And it would always go something like this: Martin, you can't dig a hole deep enough for us to fall into that I can't get us out of. And if you can, it's my fault. I shouldn't have given you that shovel. So go for it. And if you fail, I'll work out how to get us back out. Now, what that does, it inspires your team to actually go out and have a go. But, Sarab, I've spoken to you about sales managers that want to sound like the old sergeant major in the army and yell and scream and shout. That doesn't inspire anybody to have a go, because so you need to get a good culture in the company. You need people to understand he's got my back. If you're absolutely stupid about what you did, obviously you're going to get a bit of a telling off. But I love people that make mistakes. I love people that almost get it right and make another mistake that's similar but different, because these are people that actually have the courage. And anyone listening to this podcast, employers, if they can see the logic behind what you're doing, they will generally be happy if you had to go and fail far more than if you didn't bother. And Martin, I'm sure you've worked with enough companies. The person that comes up after the event and says, "Oh, I knew that wasn't going to work," they're the worst enemy of any company. Because if you knew it, you should have said something at the beginning. Now,
how many times have you worked with somebody, we've done this before, closed language, versus somebody that said, we've done this before, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and they share their wisdom. Rather, we've done this before. I'll give you an example. My first job was a team manager in a call center for international directory inquiries. So this was people ringing up for telephone numbers in other countries. And for many countries, there was a database. When the database went down, the operator can call up the overseas directory assistants. When that went down, the customer would get a credit, they would call back. There were some people who were like, bring back the telephone directories, because telephone directories never went down. But telephone directories were never accurate and up to date. And it would take maybe 10 minutes to walk over, wait for your directory to come and finish. And the customer, they want their phone numbers like that. Even back when I was working in the late 90s, the telephone directory may not have failed. However, it failed because it wasn't accurate. It wasn't up to date. And it would take a long time. And you would have to be thumbing down, finding the name. A database back then, you could get a phone number within 20 seconds. So it was still, we've done this before. I don't want to go back to the days of telephone directories with all the mobile phones that we have right now. But others would say, yes, but it was like that. But can you remember, we don't have to do this anymore. And that's the difference. It's that wisdom. It's the courage to share the information. It's the courage to make things better.
And you need to respect tradition and history, but embrace innovation and the future.
Yeah.
And I think there is always half glass full, half glass empty. People, no matter how much glass the glass full is, they'll always look at, oh, there is still 1/4 empty. All right, so what about the 3/4, which is full? No, but there is 1/4 empty. So you don't have any cure for pessimism, I would say. And there are people who are always pessimistic, and they will always talk about the negative point or the negative side of everything, irrespective of how much positivity you might try to infill them around with. But before we end today's episode, Martin, one last question for you is, if you have to sum up today's episode for anyone who is listening to us, are there any key takeaways that they can learn on courage, on becoming more courageous, not only as a leader, but more courageous as a person in their life as a whole?
So really, it's my definition of courage, which is take ownership of fear and venture forward with confidence and resilience. So really, when you own the fear, you understand. You don't let it control you. And when you move forward at a pace you feel comfortable, start doing things, start experimenting, give things a try, fail early, and be resilient. Life, we have to be resilient. We need more grit in life to actually get through those tougher challenges. Otherwise, we keep doing the same thing time and time again and become complacent. So just have that grit, that strength, learn from what you've learned in the past and carry that forward. And that's really the crux of courage, in my view.
Yep. And I think be courageous and stand up for what you really care about. I think that's one of the key takeaways from this episode. But thank you so much, Martin. Really appreciate your time this evening. You've been able to share some really good insights on courage and how people can just stand up for their voice. And coming from you, it is really inspiring to listen, and it's going to be inspiring to listen for other people as well who will tune into the episode on the Spotify, Apple iTunes, and LinkedIn. For those of you who are listening to us from Sydney, love to see some of you in our upcoming event on the 22nd of November, where we are having an in-person panel discussion with 5 great speakers joining us from Sydney. I've already invited you, Martin, to that event, so I hope to see you as well if you are in Sydney. We also have a very special event organized by George, which is happening, I think, next Saturday on his 68th birthday.
21st.
21st. How dare you?
His 21st birthday. That's right.
Martin, it is my 21st birthday with 47 years experience.
I know. He wasn't very courageous there. It was very resilient of him to do that, but it wasn't very courageous.
But thank you for mentioning it.
On that note, we end this episode, and I hope to see everyone in the events ahead and listen to our podcast. Keep on supporting it like that. Thank you.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.